Hi guys, I'm Tori Trades, and in today's video, I'm going to be rating trend lines. I'm going to be going through what is an A+ trend line, what is a 10 out of 10, what is the most aesthetic trend line here. So let's go through each one of these instruments and walk through a trend line that I would place a trade on, a trend line that I would truly draw, and maybe trend line no-nos, trend lines that don't actually make sense and do not draw them. All right, let's get started. We're going to start with crude oil. I'm on a 5-minute time frame here, and let's walk through each one of these trend lines that I have drawn on the screen. You can see I am in a current trade. We've got an open trade going on right now. This is for my Apex evaluation. Wish me luck. This is my very first try. This is my first attempt. But right now, why do I have the lines where they're at? I've got a point A here and a point B here. I took a short position based on the break of this trend line. We're in a 5-minute time frame, so I am apt to taking trend line breaks on 5-minute time frames with only 2 touch points. But when we're looking at a 10 out of 10 trend line, we want 3 touch points and a lot of data to work with. So let's try to see if we can find an A+ setup or an A+ trend line, a 10 out of 10. Each one of these trend lines that I have on the screen, none of them are 10 out of 10s. This is truly just a I hope this trade works out. I've got parameters in place in case it doesn't. It's just not one of my A+ setups. So this is me being vulnerable and showing you guys not the best setup. I'm in a trade here where I could have had 3 touch points. I didn't, and I still got into the trade. But now let's go into another instrument. So that was crude oil. Let's take a look at gold. All right, we're in gold on also a 5-minute time frame. Let's zoom out a little bit and talk about each one of these trend lines. So we'll talk about the most steep trend line. This one is beautiful. This trend line right here, 10 out of 10. Because 1, we have 3 touch points, and 2, we have plenty of data to work with here. We've got from May 1st, now we're in the 5-minute time frame, so it's still plenty of data. We got a lot of candles. So we've got May 1st all the way to today, May 2nd. Doesn't seem like a lot of data, but look how many candles we have in between. We've just got a lot of data to work with here. So 3 touch points, plenty of data, 10 out of 10 trend line. Let's look at the next trend line. This one right here. We've got 1, 2, do we have 3 touch points? Oh my God, yet another A+ trend line. All right, now even though we're using one of the previous touch points from the last trend line, this is still A+. We've got this last high at around 233.39, and then these 2 additional touch points after. A+, 10 out of 10, love this. Let's go back and even see this less steep trend line. Oh my God, do we have yet another 10 out of 10? Now, in the 5-minute time frame, I can't see all the data, so I'm actually going to bump it up to a 1 hour. It looks like a laser show. I know all these lines that I drew were on the 5-minute time frame. Usually when I start doing my top-down analysis, I stay in that lower time frame, but we are backing it up just to see this one specific trend line here. Okay, so we've got point A back here on this last high, and point B. Okay, so we've only got 2 touch points for this downward trend line here. We did come in a little bit steeper with those trend lines that I had in the 5-minute time frame, but this right here is still, this is a great example of it's still a very accurate trend line. It's accurate because this truly was an area where the price of gold made a high and then turned around. Same back here. It made a high and then turned around. So yes, we have 2 touch points on this trend line. We may very well get a third. We've got to just simply wait for price to progress to see if we do get that 3rd touch point. But with the data that we have now to work with, it's still an accurate trend line. We just simply need to wait for that 3rd touch point to see if we get it. Okay, so I'd say for our trend lines on gold, we're looking pretty A+. Let's see if we can look at this upward trend line that we had in the lower time frame. All right, upward trend line, we have point A, point B, and there is no point C. We very well could have taken a signal here. This could be a signal to go short. According to my strategy, price has broke this upward trend line that's got 2 touch points, but it's not an A+ setup. It doesn't have the 3 touch points, but it does have the plenty of data. So we can kind of make some adjustments, have some discretion here on this trade and say, okay, no, we don't have 3 touch points, but we do have plenty of data to work with and a very clear point A and a very clear point B. What's cool is you could simply just pass up on this trade. How crazy. You don't have to take every trade. We could pass up on this trade and wait for a better trend line that has that 3 touch points and that plenty amount of data to work with. Or you can say, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and take this position anyways. Maybe it's not an A+ setup, but the risk is very low, so that very well could make this a setup that you can take. But just understanding that, okay, there's things that we can put into place here. We don't have to take every trade. We can wait for a better setup. We can wait for a better trend line. But I wouldn't say don't take it, because you can still very well take it. Low risk here. If it doesn't work out, we're going to know pretty quickly with minimal risk. So I'd say for this upward trend line, we'll give it like a 8 out of 10. That's too high. We're going to give this a 7 out of 10. Now let's look at the lowest trend line that we have here, this lower upward green trend line. To go back, we may have to go to a 1 hour time frame to see where this trend line starts because this has a lot of data behind it. We're going to go to the 1 hour trend line. We're going to go to the 1 hour time frame. All right, coming in. We've got point A back here on February 29th, looking at 2036. That is the first touch point for this upward trend line. The point B we are using on the most recent data. I don't have a lot of confidence in this trend line. One, because the touch point that we drew on here is using the most recent data that we have. Very, very fresh. We don't have a very clear point B from the past that's giving us previous data to work with. We are simply just using what price has given us very recently to use this point B, or to use as a point B for this trend line. I'm going to give this one a very low rating. I'm going to say 1 out of 4 for the trend line here. And let me explain more. So in the past, we had this trend line in many different areas. At one point, we had this trend line back here. We had touch point, very close touch points over here. We had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 touch points. If I could give that a 20 out of 10, I absolutely would. Plenty of data. We're talking 8 touch points here on this trend line. Price truly respected this trend line, an excellent trend line. But the fact that it has yet broken, and we are simply trying to find which one is the new trend, we don't have as much data. We don't have as much touch points. So I would take this trend line. We would have had it here at one point. Okay, this was an area where price of gold came down and then turned around. But then if we look over here, it's broke it yet again. So we don't have as much touch points. We don't have as much data to work with for this new trend line, and it just keeps getting broken. Every time we try to find this new point B, it breaks it. So this is why I'm going to give this a very low rating for this new place where we have this trend line. But in the past, this was it. This was the one. When the price of gold crossed this was A+ setup. I just can't even rave more about this. 20 out of 10 trend line. And 10 out of 10 setup for taking a short position on this trade here. Low risk. I love everything about this setup. Everything about this setup. But now if we're working with data most recently, I'm not feeling great about it. So I would consider this a missed move. I didn't catch this trade. I didn't catch this opportunity. I want to wait for a better setup. I want to wait for an area where the price truly does give me multiple touch points on this trend line. So these are my ratings for gold trend lines. Let's move on. All right, now let's go to platinum, my favorite. Okay, let's start first and foremost, this steeper upward trend line we have. I'm giving that a 2 out of 10. This is too steep. We don't even have a true point B to work with. I feel like somebody just slapped that on the screen and they were just guessing. My idea here is I want to delete this trend line, so much so. That's why we have a 2 out of 10 for this trend line, so we want to get rid of it. It's not accurate. It shouldn't be on the screen. Get rid of it. Now I want to wait for platinum to give me a point B. I want to see the price come down and then turn around. Give me this new pullback, this new point B. Okay, let's say, hypothetically speaking, the price of platinum, this very next candle, starts turning around. It comes up, maybe it pulls back a little bit, and then we finally get a move. This is where I would put a more accurate point B for my trend line. I would have this last low here, and then just simply coming up to this new point B. This would be better than trying to throw a line on the screen. So it's better to simply just wait for a more clear, a more accurate pullback, a more accurate point B than to just throw one on the screen. And it truly shows patience as a trader. If you can show patience, show discipline, I mean, your trading will only benefit from that. So I would say right now, if I had to work with what platinum is giving me at the moment, I'm going to have no upward trend line. I am simply going to wait for platinum to give me a better point B. But now let's look at the other trend lines here. So we've got this downward trend line. We've got point A here, point B here. We got close to a third touch point, but not quite. I would say this is still accurate. It's not my favorite. It's not incredibly aesthetic. It doesn't have 3 touch points, but we do have a lot of data to work with, and we have a very clear area where the price of platinum came up and then started turning around. So we'll give this one a 6 or 7 out of 10. Now let's look at the previous line. We're going to back up a little bit more. This line is coming from a much higher time frame. Let's go to the 1 hour and see if we can see the point A for that. Okay, we can. Okay, for platinum, we've got point A, this last high that it made at this 1019.7. And then we've got point B, this most recent high. We've only got 2 touch points. It doesn't feel as aesthetic. It doesn't feel as right. We do have a true area where the price of platinum came up and then turned around, but if I can go back and show you guys how many times we would have had to move this, it makes it feel less valid. So at one point, we would have had the downward line for platinum here. This is a clear point B. It crossed it. Then we would have moved it to here. It crossed it yet again. Then we would have moved it to here. Thank gosh, it finally respected this point long enough, but then still crossed it yet again. So this would have been the most accurate. This would have been the 10 out of 10 trend line. If I had to pick one for a downward trend line on platinum, this would have been it. We've got plenty of touch points. The price respected it finally, and we've got a lot of data to work with here. So point A, point B, point C. I mean, we got 1, 2, 3, 4, almost 5 touch points on this downward trend line. But we didn't get that point B, or that accurate point B, until Friday, April 19th. Whereas before, we thought it was here, 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 and then finally we got that new point B, and then it truly did respect it. But then, now we can see prices since then populated. At one point, we would have had it here. Then we've got 1, 2, 3 touch points. This was actually a trade that I took. This was the setup that I took. Price broke this downward trend line. We had 1, 2, 3 touch points, plenty of data to work with. I said, yep, this is my trade. We're taking a long position here. And I think I closed it somewhere around maybe this 933-ish area. So capitalized on that little move here, but you can see that I was kicking myself when it continued to go up even higher. But if we had to find somewhere to put this new trend line, where could I give this a 10 out of 10? And I would say, okay, here it was. At one point, we had yet another downward trend line. 1, 2, 3 touch points. Okay, this would have been another beautiful long entry. But then it crossed it. So we had to move it again. All right, it gave us another 1, 2, 3 touch points on a downward trend line. Crossed it. Yet another entry to go long. If you would have taken this last most recent entry to go long, we actually haven't gone anywhere. So we may be going into some consolidation, some sideways movement. But we're talking trend lines. With the data that we have most recently, I don't have a 10 out of 10 area to put this. Right now, this is all I have to work with. We may possibly get a third touch point in the future, but in this 1 hour time frame, this is the only place I can put it. We've got point A back here on this last high, and then point B on another area where the price of platinum came up and started turning around. These are my ratings for the trend lines on platinum. All right, moving on. We got silver. Silver is going to look fairly similar to gold, but let's go into that 5-minute time frame and see. Ooh, okay. I feel like we can all agree that this is ugly. It is ugly. This is not right. This is not accurate. We don't have a clear point B. It looks like, yet again, someone just threw a trend line on the screen because they had to. We don't have, I think the clearest answer to this is that we just don't have a point B. Yes, we've got some data, but we have no clear area to put this point B. So I'm going to say, same scenario here. I am simply going to delete it and wait for another one. Wait for the price of silver to give me an area where it pulled down, made a new low, and then started turning around again. But now let's look at some of the other previous trend lines. So let's look at the downward trend lines. The downward trend line, 10 out of 10. Love to see it. 1, 2, 3, 4 touch points. Maybe we'll give this an 11 out of 10. We've got 4 touch points, plenty of data. I have no complaints about this downward trend line. I'm here for it. But now upward trend lines, we don't have anything to work with. And this is where we have to be patient as a trader. We got to just sit on our hands, wait for a better point B. Let's move on to copper. This is going to be our last instrument here. Copper gave us some very interesting moves recently, and let's go over them. So I left some lines on the screen here that have already been crossed, but I want to go through them and talk about why they were 10 out of 10, but now why we need to delete and find a new one. So for this most recent downward trend line, absolutely beautiful. Now, this is an instance where we had a A+ setup, 10 out of 10 trend line, 1, 2, 3, 4 touch points. Even with all of these items on our checklist marked off, it still was a fake out. This still was a trade where it didn't work out. Even though everything pointed to this is the one, it ended up not working out. We just have to make sure that we have alerts set, that we have our stop losses set, that we have our safety lines, or whatever parameters you guys have to mitigate your risk. But right here, this would have been an instance where everything was pointing to this is the trade, this is an A+ setup, and it still didn't work out. But prices since then populated. This line is no longer accurate. Let's go ahead and delete it. Okay, now we have another trend line. We've got 1, 2, 3 touch points. Okay, love that. But price moved so far away from that trend line, so incredibly, aggressively far away from that trend line, and then finally came back to it, created a 4th touch point. This would have been an indication to, okay, these are long positions. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 touch points here. I'm gonna say even though price moved so aggressively far away from it, but still, you know, if you could have given this some time, ended up making its way back to this trend line, I'd say 10 out of 10. And this happens to be an example where this would have been the trade. We've got the A+ setup, we got the 10 out of 10 for a downward trend line, and this happened to work. We would have thought long positions here, and actually, as of this candle right now that's populating, we would be considering closing this very soon. Now, making sure that you have some things in place. If you are considering closing that long position, making sure that, okay, are we truly convinced this is turning around? Do we need to wait for the candle to close before we actually close this trade? We want to make sure that, okay, are we about to get faked out? Is this truly turning around and coming down? And just simply by waiting for that 5-minute candle to close could give you just that added confirmation. That could be the simple confirmation that you need to close this trade. Let's say that, for example, it doesn't actually continue down and it just simply faked us out. It started pulling back and then turned around. And this is where a benefit of waiting for the candle to close could help you in a trade. But right now it looks like this is continuing down. There's about 30 seconds left of this candle. Just wait, give it 30 more seconds, see if this thing is going to continue down, close that trade, take that profit, or we may be considering reversing, going short, or if this pulls back above your line that's keeping you safe, then we're staying in our trade. This is an example where this A+ setup did work out, but I didn't take that trade. So now where do I need to put this line? So I'm not in either one of these positions. So I'm simply going to take this point B and move it here. Now, this trend line, what's the rating? I'm going to say this is a 6 out of 10. I don't have a whole lot of data to work with, but it is a clear area where the price of copper came up and is starting to turn around. So I'm going to say 6 out of 10, not my favorite. I wouldn't consider it an A+ setup if it gets crossed, but it's still valid. All right, guys, that was my analysis on trend lines and my ratings for each one of them. If you guys have the same trend lines, awesome. If you don't, drop it in the comments. See you guys in the next video.